Can everyone hear me from here? All right, cool. Oh, thanks for having me here tonight, and yeah, really cool to see so many people that are interested in the field that I'm pretty fascinated with. As you heard from the introduction, my team and I are working on a brain-computer interface for helping people with brain injuries and with cognitive issues and also for PTSD treatment. So these are kind of areas where the therapeutics are available, but they don't always work. And also people don't necessarily want to have to take medication all the time. Obviously, I'm all for medication, but sometimes you need to find an alternative for patients that can't have those kind of treatments. So the goals of our project are to produce work that and devices that are really high quality, and our end goal is to be able to give people the power to control their own device and their own data. It's really important to us to behave ethically with the data that we work with. There's a lot of unethical data use in lots of spaces, and I think that brain data is pretty intimate. You don't want to take that away from people, especially not lock them away from their data. The reason I started the project was initially because I was diagnosed with ADHD in my early 30s, and after that, my daughter was diagnosed with autism and ADHD. So what we're doing is very personal to me. It's not something we're doing for like any kind of financial gain so much. It's more we want to do it right, make sure we do things properly, and it takes time to do it. But it's really exciting because not only can you use this stuff for games, but you can also use it for medical sensing or all sorts of different areas. So the work that we've done so far has been to develop our initial sensor here. So as you can see, it's quite a bit bigger. And like from that, we had help from Bionics Queensland. We wouldn't have been able to do any of the work we've done without the funding we got through their Bionics challenge. And now we're working on the next stage, which is so this one's a single sensor. The next stage is a 24 sensor full headset. So we've got our main boards done and our sensors built. Now we're optimizing the combination of the two together and starting on the software. So when I talk about the therapeutic applications of this technology, it's very similar to the learning process that people go through in any kind of regular activity. So when you think about it, when you learn a task, say you pick up a pencil and you draw on the piece of paper, you can see the piece of paper, you can feel the piece of paper, you can feel the pen in your hand or the pencil in your hand, and you can see the outcome of the movement that you make to do that kind of drawing activity. But think about when you do it with your brain, you can't really tell what's happening internally. You might have a feeling, oh, that's really hard to do, or I'm really feeling uncomfortable about that kind of task, but you don't really have any direct feedback on why it is that you're having those kind of feelings. Our brain doesn't have any sensory neurons, so when you see the kind of brain surgeries they don't need to use anesthetic when they do them in some parts of the brain, which is good because they often need to know that area is functioning to be able to do the surgeries. But yeah, we don't have sensory systems in our brain to sense what's happening to itself internally, which is what we're trying to do here. So the therapy is called neurofeedback. So what happens is that the headset measures the brain activity. It detects the changes or the improvement in the brain activity. The game then responds to that brain activity. And so you have a positive response within your game situation. So just like social media is optimized to get you to pay attention, this is the same kind of process, but it's to improve the way your brain functions. So to focus better, to think faster, to be able to consciously control your emotions better. Really very, very important things for people with any kind of brain injury or learning difficulty, because they often struggle to control the emotional side of their experience. Like, say for example, brain injury patients, they often describe that they've gone from a patient happy person to someone who's really angry at the drop of a hat. So they can't control the way they respond to people or situations like they could before. So they've had that taken away almost overnight. Whereas people like myself, who've kind of, I've always had issues with trying to control motivation and focus and everything like that. But I can't imagine what it would be like to have all of those abilities and not have an issue with it, and then have it suddenly taken away. That's so. When we talk to brain injury patients, they're the one they've really kind of, it really hits hard to see people that have had this taken away and they reach a certain point of improvement, and then they're told, oh well, sorry, that's the way that it's going to be for the rest of your life. There's not going to be any improvement, and I don't think I wouldn't be happy with that. And there's good evidence in the research to say that things like this neurofeedback can provide significant improvement, but obviously we have to register our device and do all of the clinical stuff before we can make any claims like that. But that's the goal at the end, to make a clinical device that provides the therapy that's needed. So yeah, the game rewards the player, and so you get a sense of, oh well, this is what's working. The interesting thing is that they find there's not just improvements in one area. If they focus on a certain region of the brain, say if they focus on the frontal lobe for cognitive function, they'll have improvements all over the brain when they do this therapy. So it's not just, they don't really understand why that works. And I haven't found any research that explains it, but it seems to improve overall function, and it doesn't do it for a short time, it does it for long periods of time after the training period. So that I find particularly exciting. After my experience of like short-term ADHD medication, it helps you great for short periods of time, but doesn't necessarily help you. Say in the morning when you wake up, you've got to wait till the medication's working, and that doesn't necessarily work with real life. So the key is the positive feedback loop that we always use in any learning process. You get the feedback for what's happening around you, and you respond to what's happening around you. So the kind of people that we want to help, this is just one example. So for example, we've got a student who maybe is one of the people with subtle learning issues. So they don't fit all the criteria to get a diagnosis. So if you're in that situation, you can't get support when you learn at school. You can't get medication for treatment, and you also can't access the NDIS for any supports in that way. So they're probably the majority of people with learning difficulties. And what I didn't realise when I started the project is, say, for example, the autistic group, they're a tiny percentage of the population overall. But if you look at the number of people with learning difficulties, difficulties, of non-specific learning difficulties. So nothing they can put their finger on. They just struggle with everything in terms of not just school stuff, but they struggle with the emotional side and everything else. They can't get a diagnosis because they're not quite disabled enough, which is terrible. Like, if you don't feel like, you wouldn't feel like you fit anywhere. So that group is, say we've got the autistic group in the population, the learning difficulty group is up above the ceiling. And I didn't know that before I started the project. So like, if we can help the people who aren't necessarily covered by the current medication and therapy options, then I mean, that would be a massive deal for me, because like, the reason I wanted to become a scientist and had my career in science was because I wanted to help people. I mean, there's also the kind of the growing area of PTSD in veterans and service people and ambulance and paramedic type situations, and also a really massive area of disability coming out of COVID. The whole oh, that's not finished. Apologies for that. I was working on this afternoon. I missed something. Sorry. Well, what I would have said was that they get a reduced level of distress in general life, and that they can regulate their emotions, and they can tell better when a PTSD episode is going to come along, and take the necessary steps to kind of move away from their family members, so they're not kind of lashing out to them in those kind of situations. Like, I mean, this is the reason now that we're talking, and we've taken on a ex Air Force member onto the team who's he's kind of dealing with his own stuff after his service, and like, it's been a big motivation now to actually recontact with military. I mean, I did military service myself and just never thought to kind of really connect with that space. But because it's become now a really big deal, that people are really struggling and they're not getting the help, it might be something we can do. I guess it's the problem with our project in some ways is there's so many options that we have, it's narrowing it down to what's possible. And what I found in Australia is that the issue being that there is not much funding for hardware tech startups in Australia. It's a very hard place to get funding. So what you have to do is try to find enough connections overseas to connect with the investment over there, because over there, this project could have been easily funded from before the first prototype stage. So before we proved that it was possible, it's much easier to get funding from that stage, versus here where we're just about finished our first, well, workable product more or less, and we still can't get funding for the project. Just frustrating, but it's not the same. It's not like it's just us. It's every other project. So I tend to work together with other people in the hardware space, and we support each other. So I mean, that's been a really great thing that's come out of things like the Bionics Queensland Challenge, whereas we've now got a bit of a network of people that we talk to and share resources around, and or if someone has a good connection, then they share them around. So say we just started doing work with CSIRO scientists this year, which has taken me about 2.5 years of work to connect with them. So that was a big deal, and yeah, they're really excited. So that's really reassuring to kind of connect with researchers in the space, because we want them to look at what we're doing and make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to do. My approach is still the kind of approach I'd take as a scientist going into this kind of thing, and if it doesn't work, I don't want to produce it. So yeah, it's been a long road, but apparently, like from what I've talked to people about, like this is pretty much the average time, maybe a little bit faster than average for most hardware projects, which is one reason why they like to fund the software side, because you can go right here and you can go straight to international production, which is totally understood. But people need kind of hardware because we're hardware creatures. We're not built of applications. So the competitors that we've got currently in the space, and I'd say that the kernel system is probably the closest to what we're aiming for. So what we're looking for is a full head measurement. So we want to measure all of the parts of the brain, so not just the forehead that you can see on the ones here. They only measure certain areas, which works for certain limited functions, but you can't really measure full activity. So like the areas of space we're looking at are the neurogaming, entertainment, and wearables. That's the pre-registration options that we have. So actually the neurogaming space is a new kind of area where people can use sensors and haptic interactions, so that even people with quite severe paralysis can still compete on the same level as people with no paralysis. And I love that idea, because I think people should be able to compete equally in some kind of space, to show people that just because you don't have a physical capacity in some area, that you should be able to show that you can be just as interesting as everyone else. The spaces in the global kind of market we're looking at is growing quite nicely. I mean, we're hoping that this will be this will make it easier for us to gain funding once we finish our headset. So like, the problem with hardware is you need to finish the product before you can actually show it off. You can't show off a half-built, well, you can, but it doesn't really make the same impact as actually showing someone something working. Which I guess is why a lot of projects will mock up things and pretend that their thing works when it doesn't actually do it. But they show the concept of how it would work. So I'm not very comfortable with that, because it starts off your presentation to your potential people that you want to help with a deception, or telling them, oh, well, this is already finished. Yeah, I wouldn't be very comfortable with that. It's not, I don't think it's the way you should go if you're building something. Now, I might skip over these ones. Like, this is stuff I've had to learn during my project. It's been a quite tricky process to learn how to narrow down a market and work out what size it is, everything else like that. I'll skip through them. So the next stage we want to get to, once we've got our primary stuff out, is to parallel that with making medical grade and registered medical applications. So like I was saying, like going into the neurological disorders, mental health, and enhancement of activity. They're using EEG neurofeedback a lot in sports teams in the UK, and they're starting to use it in Australia. And now it's really nice to see the NDIS is now rebating on neurofeedback. And what I didn't know, I only found this out last week, is that 60% of the people on NDIS have an autism diagnosis. 60% of all the people on NDIS. That's because that's one area where people were able to get funding. I think it's not reflective of the population of disability overall. I think it's more that it's hard for them to debate when people have a diagnosis at a certain level, because you have to have autism of a sufficient severity to be able to get NDIS access. So if it's 60%, that's a tiny fraction of of the people really in need of support. So I think I've covered a lot of this, but a lot of startup is kind of working out how you fit and where you can go with what you've built. So the idea with us is to have those options available and then connect with the people that we might get interested in it. Like at the moment, we're quite interested to talk to the defence minister. So I guess that's one of our next goals, is to get in front of one of the people involved in the Defence Department and see whether they're interested in putting a relatively small amount into what we're doing, and see if we can help the people that are coming out of the defence industry, because that would be very fulfilling for me as an ex-service person. So yeah, it's been a long process. Oh, that's another thing I didn't mention. The thing I thought when I first started the project was, well, surely now I'm a startup founder, there'll be less paperwork. I don't know why I thought that compared to science, but yeah, I was very naive. But like, it's something you learn over time. Same with any job, I guess. I feel like startup founders are a bit like being a student crossed with being a scientist. So you learn a lot of different areas, and some you like and some you don't. And over time, you get to know who can help you in whichever area. I'd really encourage that any students here who are interested in working on interesting projects to go and visit the UQ Adventures place. If you haven't been there and talk to the people, like, there's always projects running, and if you find an interesting one, it can redirect your entire career. Or it might be something you can put on your CV that no one else has. Like, they're doing very interesting stuff. Like, it's nice to see that since COVID, the investment spaces and the way universities treat innovation and kind of development of projects has shifted a little bit. They're a little bit more open to encouraging students, and like, they're very supportive of students, but once you've graduated, it's understandably they don't have an investment in the people that are finished. So if you get involved with it now, you get a lot of support. So it's worth exploring if you've got a project you want to explore. We've also been taking advantage of the recent developments in AI for data analysis. So one thing I was concerned about back in 2017 was, are we going to be able to process the amount of data that we need to process in the short amount of time we have, and how are we going to do that? So my thoughts was that we'd be using the more primitive machine learning work that was being done at the time, and knowing that we had at least a couple of years of development of the industry, but then OpenAI and everything else has boomed. So kind of comes at a really good time for us to actually use the tools that are available for that to develop kind of data. And what we've found is that the interesting thing in Australia is that you can get funding much more easily for a hardware project combined with a software project. So you can get funding for a software project that's associated with a hardware project much easier than you can get funding for a hardware project associated with software. So it's really the way you approach the way you talk about it, almost. So that's one thing we're playing around with at the moment, because we've found some areas that aren't being served. So we might get our funding that way. Okay. I don't think I need to cover this one so much. Or this one. That's just scary. It's probably going to be more than that now. Now that I've done some more calculations. But this was the next minor milestone for manufacturing optimization. So that covers the kind of things like preparing preparing all of the kind of molds that you need for mass manufacture. So and working out who's going to make your components and where they'll be assembled, and making sure that the components you're using aren't toxic or going to cause any problems to people. All the kind of really cool stuff that I found industrial designers are awesome at. Like, I really appreciate that field so much more, and I didn't really understand it when I started. But they're like a cross between philosophy, art, and science, and making at the same time. It's quite cool when you come across a truly passionate industrial design group. They can make a massive difference on any project. So if you're looking to build something, it's worth at least going to talk to someone, or at least looking into the field, because there's a lot of design principles that you can take along with you that will guide you on all sorts of things. Like principles that I didn't know existed, but when you hear about them, they make a lot of sense. Say the amount of weight you have for an object. Say an iPhone has a certain weight because it could be much lighter, but if it's much lighter than it is, it doesn't feel like it's high quality. Or a watch that has a certain balance, that kind of thing. Very inherent kind of psychological factors in a product that make it something people really want to use. So the team we have is, we've built it over quite a lot of time. Like, had to try and fill in the gaps that I don't have in trying to look after the parts of the project. And it's actually kind of built up further now. So, and we've got another person to add in, Chinese Bernard, who's just joined, and she's worked in the investment space before. So now the investment and the team management and organisational space, all things that I struggle with ADHD. So the thing that I've taken from my former career is that always get good advice when you're doing something. It's better to ask first and then do what you're doing and make the mistakes and then go back again, rather than make a lot of mistakes and then be in the completely wrong direction. I always used to say to my honours students that better to come to me before you've finished your project so I can help you with the edits, rather than coming to me a day before it's due and then we find out that there's all of these issues we could have tried and fixed before that. Getting good advice, never a bad idea. Like, but finding the people that you can trust with that advice is also another thing you got to go do. So yeah, the commercial collaborations we've got to revisit our ones with 61 and 41 medical, because our project slowed much slower than we thought it would be to get to the next stage. But they're people we maybe do our collaboration for manufacturing for medical device stuff. And these are people that we couldn't have done what we're doing without. And Robin's a massive part of that. We'll get there. We'll get there. But yeah, without Bionex Game Changers, which used to be called Bionex Queensland, we got the Early Innovation Support Prize in 2020, and then the main prize for our category in 2021. And we've used that to put towards the build that we've got currently. Like, I'd really love to have it here, but it's not quite ready. But it's so close, it's like having a Christmas present you can't open. So one thing that you might want to look at if you're in the startups or you're interested in starting your own business or anything like that is to look at the kind of resources that are available from major companies like Microsoft. So like we've been able to get computing resources and things like that by being one of their startup founder people that they support, which is pretty cool. Like I didn't realize it was hard to get into until I talked to other people, but apparently it's very hard to get into. So woohoo! It's nice to get a win occasionally. And yeah, Y Combinator, they've got startup school resources that they've got massive libraries and all sorts of learning resources that you can use to connect with people overseas and internationally. If you're doing business course or anything that associates with tech, Y Combinator is the one to go to connect with people. Like just to be a part of that community, they might be the people that employ you in future, but they need to know you before they're going to employ you. Like you think about it, people make decisions on multiple factors on whether they will want to work with you. They want to know that you're someone they like to work with and can get along with, and you have the capacity to do the stuff that you say you can. But the first thing they need to know is whether they want to work with you. So they need to know you first. So those kind of communities, they're something you can do as a student to connect, but it applies to any other industry as well. That network is where you're likely to get your jobs or to have the support that you need if something goes wrong. And that's something that I learned during my career, that having people in your, not necessarily in your network, but in your field is really helpful to go to for advice. And sometimes that advice is coming out of their problems that they've had. So yeah, worth doing. Like these people, they've been very, very much essential in giving us really good advice. And a lot of them, they helped us and helped me when I really didn't know what I was doing. So I try to do the same now when I come across other people in their projects, just because it's fun to try and help them if they're stuck on something, and you can just direct them to something that's easy to solve. Or yeah, any of those kind of things. Like I'd say the same goes for any other career. Like helping people doesn't cost you anything, and people remember it. Like leaving a trail of happy people around you is much better than kind of leaving people in your wake that you've trampled over. It works out better in the end. Sorry, I wasn't expecting this to become a philosophy lesson, but yeah, I think we've covered pretty much everything now. Yeah, I couldn't bring the headset frame because the template that we've got is a bit too fragile to bring along, but yeah, that's been pretty cool at the moment. But yeah, very happy to present, and thank you for coming.
And thank you so much. We really loved hearing you speak, and it's been really informative and super interesting. I was wondering if anyone, I'll go to the floor. Oh, we have the sliders. We have a few questions that came through. So the first question is, what are the benefits of fMRI sensing systems over EEG systems? Are there any drawbacks to using this technology over EEGs for a customer device?
EEG is really fast, so because it's electrical, it measures at about it's at about 1,000 measurements a second. So, and because it's electrical, it does measure very fast. It also has you can also measure the different brainwave types. So compared to what we're doing, we're more like if you've seen an MRI image, the principle of the imaging that you use for an MRI is what we do with our sensing system. Slightly different. We're not using the magnets that they use to measure changes in movement of fluids in the brain or any other part of the body, but it's a very similar process. So we're measuring movement and metabolism versus for the EEG, it's directly measuring the brain electrical flow. And there's actually some very interesting research now, and the debate's been reopened into whether blood flow aligns directly with brain activity. So that's meant I had to adjust our design slightly to have a factor in there that can verify that what we're seeing is real. So we've added some extra functionality.
Yeah, well, on functionality, there's one question here that says, as a former national level athlete, not me, how could I have benefited from the device? Would this help me with training focus or injury recovery? So how could this kind of device help an athlete?
It's generally used for increasing speed and motor coordination. So any of the things that it does in someone who's had a brain injury, it has a measurable effect in people in general function. So it helps anyone. It's just much more obvious in someone who's having issues with those areas, say for balance and everything else. Particularly good for speed improvement. So that's why they're using it in the elite team sports, and also they're starting to move into it in the esports space, because there it's a matter of fractions of a second between winning and losing. So, but the issue again, I've talked to the people overseas that are doing it in the soccer teams, and the issue comes back over and over. The same issue we had with using it for brain injury or autistic people, that they're very sensitive to things on their head. They can't handle too much pressure, and they don't like the feeling of having stuff glued to their head. So EEGs, that's the downside of EEG, that it takes a lot of time to set up. It's really sensitive to movement, and you can't really use it while you're moving.
How would you describe the impact of winning your success? I'm confused. Okay, could you talk a little bit about the difficulty that you've had, like accessing funding? How long do you expect this to be a barrier for your progression and for neurotech startups in general?
I think it's a lot less of a barrier than it was, purely because people know what the space is. I mean, it's hard to explain something to someone who hasn't encountered any of it before. Pretty much for the first couple of years that I was doing this, you'd talk to them and they'd have this kind of, you're definitely a crazy person look to them. And fair enough, it's a weird concept. And when we did have TV spots from Bionics Queensland, we got a lot of people very worried that we were trying to steal their thoughts, or that we were trying to control people's brain activity. And I was always happy to engage with them, because that's something I would never want to do, and explain to them that even if we were scanning the person's brain continuously for long periods of time, the brain changes so quickly that you might be able to train a system to recognize words and emotion, some kind of emotional connectivity for a certain period of time. But over time, that shifts away again, and they have to do the training again to train the machine learning system. Our brains change all the time; they don't stay the same. What I find really exciting is that even when you're in your hundreds, the brain is still regrowing new neurons. So they thought, when I started career in science, they thought that once your brain finished growing at about 21, it didn't do anything else from then. And if you lost neurons through a head injury or something like that, then it would never regrow. You couldn't fix anything, you couldn't change anything. But I think it's really a positive idea that anyone can change quite significantly if they're given the tools to do it. And that goes for any kind of medication that helps with, say, depression or anything like that, or for any kind of therapeutic application, or a talk therapy even like that. That changes the way the brain functions. Just talking about something or sharing something with a friend can change your entire way of thinking. Very interesting kind of concept.
Yeah, no, I think it's
Well, thanks, Robin.
no, that's great to hear that that there's people willing to fund neurotechnology and that it has like a big future going forward. One other thing from the slide that we've had come through a few more times is a little bit more clarification on NFRI technology, how it helps people with autism or ADHD control their emotions, and also how expensive is it, and could a uni student make one? That's what the audience is wondering.
Could a uni student make one? Probably they could make a simple version of the kind of sensing systems that are used with this kind of stuff. It's a matter of are they able to put those all things together? I mean, I would very much encourage anyone in electrical engineering to play around with stuff. Like, the making movement is really important. Like, I'm very much in the space of like what Cory Doctorow or William Gibson talks about, where the next generation, you've grown up knowing what it's like to be connected all the time. You know how to use the tools in a way that I can't grasp, because when I was 10, or it wasn't, by the time I was 18, there still wasn't an internet. Like, I haven't grown up exposed to all of that. You know how to use it in a way that people that are older, they don't have any concept of how to live in that world and use it in a way that's positive. Like, we see a lot of negative in terms of social media or the way it's used to manipulate people. But I think that if you can expand that into, well, if you can use it negatively, you can also use it positively in a way that makes people money, but also doesn't hurt people in the process. I mean, I'd like to see more of it. I think
that's our mission, everyone, to start seeing how we can build something similar to neurotech. So get on that. Do we have any final questions from the floor? We might be able to fit one or two in. Okay. Did you have any final words?
Well, I was just going to set up the early sensor and show everyone. Just had it on the wrong port. See if it'll run. Hopefully I won't have the same issues I had earlier with the...
So what is this sensor here?
So this is the stage 1 sensor. So no, this way. That's not what I want.
So
Just gonna...
what does it normally sense?
It's optimized for oxygenated hemoglobin and deoxygenated hemoglobin.
For us non-scientists.
So blood with oxygen and blood without oxygen. So similar to a finger system, but we found that this can penetrate a lot deeper than that kind of system.
And how do you use this sensor, and how does it apply to your devices to bring meaningful results? What data does it give you?
I can show you in a second if it runs properly. It's all right. No. It's hard to explain without showing you.
What kind of spatial resolution is this?
So you mean the distance that you're looking?
Like how, I guess, I'm imagining it would be extremely challenging to get cell level data, but that your is this low fire and that's probably not very useful.
What you're looking for is changes over time. So this is the raw data that's coming through from this one. This is about 1,000 times slower than our next level per sensor. So we're going from this, which is 2 per second, to over 24,000 data points per second in our next version. Which, yeah, you can't set up a system that doesn't have AI or machine learning and process that kind of data in a fast enough time. This is the more interesting one. So it's currently sensing my hand there, but it's much more interesting when you connect it on, say, on the chest. It's much more interesting. Once it zeroes, this one kind of has to zero. I can make that bigger. Sorry about that. This one auto calibrates, so you just got to leave it for a little bit. Now, when this is properly in place, it's able to measure breathing and as well as changes in heart rate over time. Like what you're seeing here is very messy data because I'm moving this with my hand, and it's also measuring the blood flow running through my fingers. So I can send you I can send the group some testing videos where it's held in place better. It's much more obvious. But we weren't actually expecting it to perform as well as it does now in the current form, and it's taken us this amount of time to work out why it performs so well. Had to dig into the research and try and understand, well, why, when we use this particular system, did it perform way better than we expected it was possible? And yeah, I was able to find the answer. So that's kind of changed the way we structure our entire sensor.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to see that you've got a sensor working better than expected, which doesn't normally happen, especially, I know for us engineers, we're normally finding out things are working not as good as we expected. But I'm very aware that this room is now booked for another session after this. However, we do have some pizza outside. If you'd like to have some of that, we've got some drinks that we'll be putting out there as well. So you can have a bite to eat before you head home for the night. Thanks again, Casey, for coming along, and thank you everyone for also coming to attend.
The one that really first inspired me was this one, the emotive system. Like it's the first one that passed EEG tests when I was initially playing around with it as a researcher. Let's see. And this is their second generation version. Much cuter, but not functional. Which shocked me. Totally disappointed by that experience. So yeah, the reason why I started the project was in part because I thought it was a really fascinating technology, but also because when I tried these, the EEG kind of system, it seemed like it wasn't working the way it could. So the goal was to build a better sensor head. And so we spent multiple years working on the EEG type idea. And then eventually we've shifted to a light-based system purely because the problem we found was that the more technology you have around you, the bigger problem you have with an EEG system. Like we kind of literally had to foil the walls at the hospital when we were doing our EEG work. So yeah, it's a bigger problem. The more technology you have in your home, the less you can use something like this without a lot of shielding around it. And the more shielding you need, the heavier the device becomes. So, for example, something like this is picking up everything in this room. So it's going to be picking up the air conditioning, the lights, the smoke detector flashing there. It's supposed to pick up the smallest of electrical signals. So as you can imagine, when it comes in contact with the modern world, it's kind of finding everything. It's like a needle running across a really rough surface. So yeah, we shifted to light because it doesn't get affected by all of those factors, and it travels a lot further into tissue. So yeah, I've got our system.
Yeah,
it's up and running. Yes, perfect timing. So look, feel free. You can pick them up. You can touch them. They're not well, this one's got little bits in it, but it might be a bit sharp. So that's the only slightly dangerous. One of the heads rusted off. So yeah, don't inject yourself with that. But yeah, look, they're pretty so you can see that like they've got the same kind of gold-plated contacts that an EEG system would have in a clinical setting, but they put rubber over the top of them. So that one actually comes with these with in between there they have little gold caps that I'm currently cleaning, and then you put these on top, little felt kind of things, and they sit into there. And then you soak them in an electrolyte gel and put them on your head wet.
Do you have to be bald to use this, or?
You have to hold it on pretty tight, and you can't really move, so makes it a little bit difficult to keep a stable signal. Like, especially because the way they set that one up, if you lose one contact, the entire system crashes. So not exactly ideal, but like it passes the tests for EEG being real, which I was pretty impressed with for a system that at the time was 1/100th of the price of the average EEG system. They did pretty damn well. Like it was about $1,000 versus the average EEG clinical system that's about $100,000. All right. Look, just you're welcome to have a look at these once we've talked about the other stuff. But feel free to pass them around if you want. Like, I just think they're interesting. Now, which do we want to use here?
You're welcome to choose whichever one works best.